In February of 2023, two police officers in Puno, Peru, stopped a group of 4 people drinking in a public park and asked to look inside a red plastic cooler. They expected to find alcohol. They found that too. But wrapped inside the same cooler, alongside the rum and the ice, was an 800-year-old mummified body, one that a 26-year-old man in the group had spent years introducing to people as his girlfriend. That discovery forced Peru's Ministry of Culture to confront a question they'd never had to formally answer before. What do you do when a stolen piece of your country's history has been living, quietly, as someone's family member? But this isn't really a story about a strange arrest. It's the first of 2 cases where the truth had been sitting in plain view for years, and no one around it had thought to ask why. This is the story of Julio, the mummy he called Juanita, and the museum-grade artifact that had been hiding inside an ordinary household for decades. And it's the story of a Soviet family in Ukraine who moved into a brand new apartment in 1984, only to discover, years later, that the building itself was killing them. 2 cases, 2 decades apart, joined by the same failure. Nobody looked closely enough, soon enough. Julio Berjo had been dating the same woman for years, according to everyone who knew him. His 2 closest friends had never met her. That alone should have been the first red flag. But friends assumed it was just Julio being private. What made Julio human, not just strange, was the ordinariness of his hesitation. He wasn't hiding a secret to protect himself. According to those close to him, he was worried his friends would make fun of her. The same insecurity anyone might feel introducing a partner for the first time. That's a normal fear. What wasn't normal was what he was actually protecting. Puno sits inside what was once Inca territory and pre-Hispanic artifacts, pottery, textiles, and in rarer cases, preserved human remains, surface here more often than most of the world realizes. Julio's father had acquired a mummified body decades earlier. It had been part of the household since before Julio was born. So when Julio's friends finally pressured him into a meeting, they assumed they'd be meeting a person. What they were actually being introduced to was a violation of Peruvian cultural heritage law that had been sitting undisturbed in a family home for years. The mummy, which Julio's family, and later Julio himself, referred to as Juanita, is estimated by researchers to be roughly 800 years old, dating to the pre-Hispanic period of Incan rule in the Puno region. The meeting itself went smoothly. Drinks were poured. Conversation was easy. By most accounts, it looked like any other afternoon in the park, until 2 officers approached the group, responding to a public drinking complaint. The officers weren't there for the mummy. They didn't know it existed. They were there for the alcohol, which raises the actual question at the center of this case. How does something this significant only get discovered by accident? When one of the officers looked inside the cooler, he stepped back and told the group not to move. What Julio had been transporting, alongside cups and ice, was Juanita herself, the mummy he'd been in what he described as an active relationship with. He later told authorities she held his hand, that she reacted physically when he misbehaved. Julio was formally charged with illegal possession of a cultural artifact, a violation under Peruvian law of protections that apply to any pre-Hispanic human remains or objects of archaeological significance. The mummy was confiscated by Peru's Ministry of Culture for further study. As of the most recent public update on the case, there had been no resolution. It's tempting to file this away as an isolated, bizarre story. But the underlying failure, an extraordinary fact hiding inside an ordinary routine for years, undetected, isn't unique to Peru. It's the same failure at the center of the next case, and it cost far more than a criminal charge. In 1984, a man named Dmitry moved his wife and 2 teenage sons into a newly constructed apartment building in Kramatorsk, Ukraine. The building was one of a wave of developments constructed in the years surrounding the 1980 Moscow Olympics, part of a broader state effort to present the Soviet Union as modern and prosperous to an international audience. The unit that opened up for Dmitry's family, Unit 85, had recently been vacated. He was told simply that it had become available. He didn't ask why. That single unasked question would matter more than anything else in this case. On move-in day, a neighbor stepped into the hallway, looked at Dmitri, and went back inside without a word. Dmitri assumed it was nothing. Over the following weeks, he noticed that almost everyone in the building carried the same quality: subdued, pale, uninterested in conversation. He had no way yet to connect it to anything specific. 2 years later, that changed. Dmitri's older son began showing persistent fatigue. It was eventually diagnosed as leukemia. Months after that, his younger son received the same diagnosis. A physician told Dmitri the illness appeared to be hereditary, a genetic predisposition shared across the family. For a time, that explanation held. It stopped holding the night Dmitri spoke with that same neighbor from move-in day. She told him something building management had never disclosed. The family who lived in Unit 85 before a mother and her 2 teenage children, had all died of leukemia within 2 years of moving in. 2 unrelated families. Same apartment, same disease. A geneticist would call that a red flag, not a coincidence. And Dmitri, without any medical training, reached the same conclusion. He spent the next year requesting inspections. He was repeatedly told the building had already been checked and cleared. By 1987, Dmitri's older son had died. Rumors began circulating that Unit 85 was cursed. It wasn't cursed. It was contaminated. And the source had been sealed inside the wall since before anyone moved in. In 1989, sitting in his son's old bedroom, Dmitri noticed a burn mark on a decorative rug that had hung on the same wall since move-in day. The mark wasn't coming from the rug. It was coming from behind it. When investigators opened the wall, they recovered a missing radioactive source. A cesium-137 capsule, originally part of a soil density measuring device used at the quarry that supplied stone for the building's construction. The capsule had gone missing during a search that was called off after roughly 1 week, so construction could stay on schedule ahead of the Olympic deadline. It had been embedded in the stone ever since, inside a wall in Unit 85. For 8 years, that wall had been emitting radiation directly into the room where 2 families, in succession, slept, studied, and lived. 6 people connected to that building ultimately died from radiation-linked illness. 17 more were left with lasting disabilities. No one was ever formally held accountable. What connects this case to Julio's isn't radiation, and it isn't crime. It's the same structural failure, wearing 2 different faces. In Peru, a genuine artifact was allowed to exist unquestioned inside a private home for decades because no institution ever had reason to look. In Ukraine, a state under pressure to meet a deadline chose to stop searching for a missing hazard rather than delay a symbol of national pride. And the cost of that decision was absorbed, silently, by whoever happened to live in one specific room. In both cases, the danger wasn't hidden. It was simply never inspected. What does it mean when the difference between an ordinary life and an irreversible one comes down entirely to whether someone, at some point, decided to ask a question they didn't have to ask? I'm Ethan, and see you in next video.